Scripture reading to prepare us for the lesson this morning is from Exodus chapter 19, verses 1 through 8. In the 3rd month after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. When they set out from Rephidim, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness, and there Israel camped in front of the mountain. Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel." So Moses came and called the elders of the people and set before them all these words which the Lord had commanded them. All the people answered together and said, "All that the Lord has spoken we will do." And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everybody this morning. I'd say this to begin with. I begin with this, and it's the only thing I'll say about myself. But I be honest with you, I always get nervous when I get ready to come up here, and I don't look forward to the public speaking. But I say that to you young guys because I'm doing something that I see as a weakness of myself. And as Christians, there is no plateau. We have to strive on. So I say that to encourage young men, and I'm proud of all the young men that are participating in things. Hey, you're not alone when you struggle with things. And I'm just reassuring you that I'm up here because I'm trying to push myself. I like to talk to you on a one-to-one basis. But to give a talk, it's more challenging. So I wanted to say that, not about myself, but to you all. And this is about him. So it's good to see everybody this morning. For those that are visiting, no, I'm not the regular preacher. Andrew is visiting his family. And so I've given this opportunity to be before you this morning, and I'm trying to take advantage of that. I have chosen to, thank you, Charles, for his reading this morning and introducing us to what we're going to talk about. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Exodus. And why Exodus? Well, I'll tell you what I in particular wanted to do this morning is what can we learn from the law? Well, be patient with me. Let's see if we can. All right. First of all, I want to begin with what is law? Well, law as defined by Webster's is simply all the rules of conduct established and enforced by the authority. Well, as you know, all nations in this world have laws. And you realize, though, actually governments are a testimony that there is a God because we recognize this chain of authority. So all rules of conduct established and enforced by the authority. That's the definition. But I wanted to also ask, well, how does he define it? So I found this. "Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and the judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live and go in and prosper and possess the land which the Lord your God of your fathers is giving you. You shall not add to the word which I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I have commanded you." I couldn't think of a better definition than what God has introduced himself and what his desires are. All right, what is sin? Well, again, let's go to 1 John 3, verse 4 says, "Whosoever commits sin also commits lawlessness, and sin is lawlessness." As you know, the word is more like a equal sign. Sin equals lawlessness. But that's not a term that we normally use, is it? So consulting one of the other translations, the King James says transgression. All right, sin is transgression or breach, overstep or breaking of the law. So I hope that makes it a little more clear. Sin is breaking of the law. All right. Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that he cannot save, nor his ear heavy that it cannot hear. But your iniquities have separated you from your God, and your sins have hidden his face from you, so that he will not hear. This verse I introduced to you because to show you the consequences of sin. It's serious business. Do you realize that when we sin, we're losing the presence of our Lord? We're losing the respect. And it's sin, ultimately, that unrepented or not obeyed is what's going to separate you from God eternally. That's what we went over, one of the verses we went over in class, in 2 Thessalonians 1, verse 8. It's or chapter 1, it's talking about the most hideous thing about Judgment Day and a wrong thing, a wrong accusation against you or judgment against you, is the fact that you'll be separated from the presence of God. We don't see God, but we see the beauty of his presence. The fact that we've got light coming in the windows this morning. The fact that I can see your beautiful faces. And by the way, you're the greatest testimony that there is a God. Wow, to be in his presence, we don't even realize it. But sin is what takes us away from his presence. Sin has consequences. It separates us from our Creator and can have eternal consequences. Anybody recognize him? Ray, he's from your time. This young man is Jesse James.
I used to live by it.
Oh, you did? Okay. Okay, Jesse James. Jesse James, we don't know of him as lawlessness, but we do know him as the term outlaw. All right? But what is an outlaw? Was Jesse under law? Yes, he was. Jesse was so much under law that there was a bounty on his head. Jesse was an outlaw because of why? Because he's in rebellion to the law. All right? So it's rebellion against God is what sin is. So what is grace, though? We keep hearing so much about it in the denominational world. Grace this and grace. Well, grace, simply put, is unmerited favor. It's something I don't deserve. All right? How does it fit into this what we're talking about? Some do try to make a distinction of the dispensation of law as opposed to the dispensation of grace. Remember, dispensation means a period of time. So there was a period of time of law, is what they're trying to say, and a period of grace. And we're under grace now. Where did they get that idea? All right? John writes and says, "For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ." And so the assumption is that, well, we're under grace and we're not under law. Let's consider that, are we? To do so, let's go back. Let's look at back in the garden. In the garden, was there an altar? No. There was no altar in the Garden of Eden, was there? Man had not sinned. It's outside of the garden because that's where man was sent to after he sinned, wasn't it? And so after he's out of the garden because of his sin, an altar was set up then. So the altar was outside of the garden. God did not intend for them to break his law. An altar is where sacrifice and forgiveness is required. Outside of the garden is where they needed that, wasn't it? Was God surprised when we broke his law? No. An altar is God's provision, God's grace. And if you realize it, God is showing by that altar a substitutionary sacrifice. Everything in the Bible is looking to Jesus. And even all the way back then, it's pointing to Jesus. So, are we under law now? Are we under law now? Well, yes. Obviously. And if you're from Missouri, you'd say, oh yeah, show me. Okay. How do we know? Because we're all sinners. I think I can say with all of you all the fact that I've sinned. I've fallen short. As sinners, what does that mean? That means I violated law, as we've already looked at the definitions. So it is my point this morning to show you that there has never been a man who has not been under law of God. From the beginning, there's always been law. So wait a minute, what was the law of Adam and Eve? Thou shalt not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that you eat it, you shall surely die. That's law. And they violated that. And therefore they were kicked out of the garden. Well, what law did Noah live under? The patriarchal law. And so man has always been under law. We are too. But we're going to get into that. All right, grace is the basis for God's dealing with man all the way through the Bible. It's the way he's dealing with us. It's the way he dealt with them then. Man didn't deserve that altar from which to offer those sacrifices, which rolled their sins forward on a yearly basis, as we're going to study in the book of Hebrews. But he did. Do we deserve to have our sins forgiven? No. But Christ came to be that sacrifice. Okay, so, all right. The dispensations, period of times. All right, the Old Testament period started, what, at Mount Sinai? The Old Testament, did it begin at Mount Sinai? No. It began at Acts 17. Let's look at that, Acts 17, verse 11. All right, there, talking about the Bereans, it says, these were more fair-minded than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness and searched the scriptures daily to find out whether these things were true. Did you catch why I brought that up? Did you catch why I brought that up when I'm talking about, well, we're trying to find when was the beginning point of the law of Moses? My point here is, what did the Bereans use to check out Paul? Well, the scriptures. What scriptures did they use? New Testament? Did they turn to Galatians or Colossians? See? No, they haven't been written. They turned to the writings of the Old Testament. That's the scriptures the Bereans were using. So wait a minute. So the Old Testament started at Passover, not the giving of the law. Well, wait a minute. I thought it began at Sinai. All right. No, the calendar was reorganized at Passover in Exodus, I think it's Exodus 12. I didn't bring my Bible up with me. When God instituted the Passover, remember the 10th plague was coming. It was going to be the death of all the firstborn over all of Egypt, wasn't it? Well, in the course of that, God gave them the opportunity to redemption by putting blood on their doorpost and on the lintel. But in the course of that, he changed the calendar, and I've talked about that before. So they were under the law prior to the Ten Commandments. These passages here are going to expose. Some other time I'll explain about the calendar, but just know that we're going to predate it because look, and he cried out unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet, and there he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them, and said, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do all that is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. What's interesting about that? Think about, and a lot of us haven't used math in quite a while, but chapter 15, is that before chapter 20? Yes. So God's already talking about ordinances and statutes before he gave the law. All right, Exodus more than chapter 20. The Ten Commandments are certainly important and were written down for our learning, Romans 15, verse 4. And Exodus is a book of redemption. The redemption of a nation of Israel. A model for learning for our redemption. And this understanding will help us to grasp the Ten Commandments, what they're all are about. My point from earlier is that there has never been a man without law. if there were, we wouldn't all be sinners, seeing that sin is a violation of God's law. If someone has sinned, can law ever save him? No. Grace has always been required for anyone who has ever violated God's law. Law cannot forgive. And God's law is voluntary, which with it brings consequences. All right. Now therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a particular treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine. And said, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do all that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord thy God that healeth thee. God has a purpose with his laws. They were to condition man to become what God is desiring. Do we not want to go to heaven? Isn't that part of your reason for being here this morning to worship God? Because you desire to go to heaven? Then shouldn't we look to his word and his laws to find out what they do to us, how they change us and make us his special people? What does God desire? 1 Timothy 2 verse 4, he desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. That's God's desires. He desires all men to be saved. But you have to come to a knowledge of the truth to do so. God has laid his will out there to all men. Those that choose to follow him will be rewarded, and those who choose to follow their own will suffer the consequences. So, Romans 12, 1 and 2 says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be you transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. God brought Israel out of Egypt. He brought them to a mountain, and with an awesome display, then makes a covenant with them. And we have been made in God's image. With that comes choice, and choice has consequences. God makes his case to Israel in Exodus 19. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. Then all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. Do you see that it's a fact that it's a covenant? These people understood. They're conscious about what they're saying. God has presented them an offering. And they, in all cognitive of mind, have accepted this. It was a covenant made. The book of Exodus is a book of redemption. We as sinners seek redemption. That redemption is found at the cross. And that person who gave his life on the cross is also the one who gave the covenant to the people to be conformed to them in what he wanted them to be. In other words, the very being that we are serving and that died on the cross, Jesus, do you realize he's the very one that spoke to Moses from the burning bush? It's Jesus that was speaking to them from the mountain and giving his will. All right. And maybe a more careful look might help us to be more of what God desires us to be. All right, let's look at beginning in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. And God spake all the words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. God has a double claim on them. Did you catch that? First, he is their creator. And second, he has redeemed them. The fact that they're there, he's already shown that he's redeemed them. Because the people gathered, you know what the people all gathered around the mountain had in common? All of them had put blood on their doorposts and on the lintel, or they wouldn't have been there, would they have? Or at least the firstborn. So the fact that they've obeyed the command, God's already redeemed them, or they wouldn't be at the mountain. He gives these laws not when they were in Egypt, not when they were in the land. It's when they were gathered at the mountain. Are you redeemed? Does God have a claim on you to obey his laws? All right, verse 3 says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. That is an absolute. Thou shalt not have any other God before thee. It's an absolute. No other authority is to be regarded. He is the only appropriate object of worship. And the first commandment tells you what we are to worship. We are to worship him. The second tells you how. Let's look at that. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water or under the earth. Does this mean we shouldn't be does this only mean we shouldn't be idolaters? I mean, none of you all have carved a statue of Baal or made some little image or something, have you? I mean, it's pretty easy. No, we haven't made, but in our day and time, could we be idolaters? This tells us how we are to worship him. And thou shalt not make any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Is Jesus Christ in heaven above? Yes. So shouldn't we make a graven image of him? How do you know what he looks like? And for those that say they've heard the voice of the Lord, I'd ask, how do you know that it wasn't the voice of Satan impersonating him? That's not the right way to judge whether things are so or not. That's why God's given us his word from which to measure those things. You know, and I'll tell you, I try to be careful about what I look at as far as people's depictions of Jesus. You know, that troubles me. And I think all of us need to be cautious. Because you know what? God's given you imagination. And when you're reading those scriptures and you envision what he looks like in your mind, that artist over there that drew this picture, you know what? His rendition of that, is it not corrupt in your imagination? Do you not find yourself thinking maybe more about that picture? So that, well, you know what? Are we to make any graven image of him? And he says any. And he says, don't make an image. He's not saying that we do make images. Those that, anybody in photography enjoys photography, or the old way? Well, the old way is it made an image. Was that a sin? No, that's not what it's talking about. A graven image is something that they're worshiping. And so we got to be careful of that. I've got another thought on that. I'll give it a minute. Exodus 20, verse 5 now says, thou shalt not bow down thyself nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that loveth me and keepeth my commandments. How does he know that we love him? Jesus says, if you love me, what? You keep my commandments, all right? By keeping his commandments. Are we saved by keeping his commandments? Okay, I followed them all. I haven't violated any of them. Remember the rich young ruler? Jesus asked him, he says, all these things I've done from my youth. Did he not need Jesus? No, he needed Jesus. But we demonstrate our love for him by keeping his commandments. There is a tendency for you and I to ascribe values to things. Now here's where I was going a moment ago. Shrouded Turin, I don't know if any of you all done any homework on that or anything like that, but I'm impressed by it. I mean, it was made by a type of radiation that wasn't even invented until last century, so how did that happen? And what they can do with the 3D and everything, but I caught myself and I back away. Wait a minute. They can give me an image of what that person that made that image looked like. But can I know absolutely that that was the Lord? No. And for those of you that know my favorite movie and those of you don't, my favorite movie's Ben-Hur. Well, yeah, it came out in 1959, but that's not the reason, okay? No, I like Ben-Hur because it's talking about the providence of God. And I like the one with, the one with Charlton Heston, and I'll tell you why. William Wilder was the director. And he understood something about this because, you know what? The actor that played Jesus, he never shows his face. And you never hear his voice. He left that for your imagination, and I appreciate that about him. Of course, I didn't know that Jesus had shoulder-length red hair, but, you know. But I say this because I want to make you cautious. We don't need to be worshiping things like a piece of the ark, Noah's Ark. If you had that, these old things can become idols in a sense, or a picture of Jesus or whatever. No. So archaeological evidence, I mentioned, like, what if somebody had a piece from the Noah's Ark? You know, no. We have a tendency to deal with tangible things, and I do. God is to be worshipped in spirit and in truth, and we need to be cautious. All right, on verse 7 it says, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain." Anybody been at a workplace and hear God's name taken in vain? By the way, have you ever heard anybody speak vile of Muhammad or Mary Baker Eddy or any of these others? No, it's always Jesus' name that's being taken in vain. So, wait a minute, what is it talking about? The first petition to the Lord's Prayer is, "Hallowed be thy name." The names that I've heard a lesson that Bill's given of all the different names of God in the Bible, and it's astounding how we need to revere this. I suspect the real breaking of this commandment, though, is by you and I, not the guy in the street using his name profanely, though. That guy that's using the Lord's name in vain he's already in trouble. But here's where you and I can be in trouble in this commandment. We are probably guilty of not hallowing his name enough. The name of Jesus. Only the Lord Jesus Christ has his name profaned. "Remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work." All right, so we're under the law here, it set aside the Sabbath. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. "In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates." They just set that aside. Chase a rabbit? Anybody? Okay, come on. Let's chase a little bit of rabbit. Do you know why this verse is important in creation? Anybody think about how this verse right here is very important to Genesis, the first chapter? Because this verse right here identifies they were 24-hour days. God set into motion, and he's saying here now, he's saying the seventh day is this, and so, no, it was this verse. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Go ahead, read that. And it rested on the seventh day. Okay. All right. We are legally liable to, are we legally liable to the Sabbath day? Are we under the law of Moses? No. When was the Sabbath instituted? In Genesis, before the law. Is keeping the Sabbath uniquely an Israeli custom? Was Adam charged with keeping the Sabbath day? No. Saving one day for rest, though, I think he's put that out there in the sense that Sabbath was not made for God, but it's made for man. And so, work 6 days. My point being is that do we take a day from which we dedicate to the Lord and meditate on his word? Do we do that enough? And I'm just throwing that out there about that. All right, what is God's plan for you? Colossians says, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of a holy day or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days." So it's not that we're under that as far as a law, but what is God's plan for you? Is there a fundamental pattern that God has blessed which puts one day in 7 as sacred for rest and meditation? Think not that I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. And whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you that except the righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. The scribes and the Pharisees really were professional law keepers. We must believe in him who has exceeded the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees to appropriate for ourselves that which he has taken care of for us. The Sabbath was made for man. We find that in Mark 2:27 and Hebrews 4:9. There is a Sabbath for the land. That was, matter of fact, why the Israelites went into bondage for 70 years was because of the Sabbath for the land. And the entire law is a gift of love from our Creator. Can we keep them for salvation? No. And will they make our lives richer, fuller, and more rewarding? Yes. All right. Exodus 20:12. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land in which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Okay, so for the children, it doesn't say obey, but to honor. This command has specific blessing if you follow it. The example is Christ himself. We find that in Luke chapter 2:52 and 2 Timothy 3 and Ephesians 6. In Israel, the punishment for a disobedient child was death. I've explained that to Nathan, and he was unimpressed, so. Okay. Thou shalt not kill. Actually, the Hebrew word is thou shalt not murder. In Genesis 9:5 and 6, God instituted the death penalty. Notice where? In Genesis 9. And God is talking to Noah at the time. And so God has instituted the death penalty back in Genesis, even at the time of Noah. It was never repealed, originally given to Noah. And the sanctity of life, including your own life, even suicide is really, it's not allowed. Life is precious. It's from God. And we need to sanctify that. We need to honor that. And who was the first murderer? Satan himself. Next, we find thou shalt not commit adultery. The sanctity of the marriage now is being the example. In Genesis 2:24, God makes it clear that the sanctity of marriage goes beyond the father and the mother. He said, wait a minute. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. It has much of leaving it as it does cleaving. Matthew 5:28 includes even the... Oh, guys. I was going to blame the computer, and I've had my hand on that. Sorry. Okay. So... I thought, anyway, obviously I'm not a professional speaker and not tech savvy either. And as much as leaving as it does cleaving, we leave our father and our mother and we cleave to our wife, don't we? Matthew 5:28 includes even the unfaithfulness. All right, Matthew 5:21 says, ye have heard that it was said of them of old time, that thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall endanger the judgment. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whosoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever says, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. I know I am guilty of breaking this command as Christ defines it. Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and therefore remember that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Agree with thine adversary quickly, and while thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee unto the judge, and the judge deliver thee unto the officer, and thou shalt be cast into prison. Verily I say unto thee, thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. Ye have heard that it was said of them of old, that thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you, that whosoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her, hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. The reason I went back and looked at some verses that were out of context with the adultery is the fact that, you know what the Sermon on the Mount is trying to do? It's trying to mold our hearts. And law is not just doing something external, but it's actually here. What does Paul say about that? Different crimes, they begin in the heart. Where was the first sin committed? Satan, and Isaiah shows it was in his heart. Sin gets committed in the heart. The rest is following through. And if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that the whole body should be cast into hell. That's how serious these things are. Jesus instructs us in the Ten Commandments in terms of the intent of the heart, not necessarily the actions. Just because you did not follow through does not make you guiltless. In Romans 3, if you're guilty of breaking one of the law, you're guilty of all. If we are honest, we are guilty of all of these. In some way, think about it. Are you guilty of any of those? Their purpose is to show us we are guilty of all of them. And thou shalt not steal. Stealing involves the deprivation of use. You don't have to thieve to steal. There are at least 27 words in the English language equivalent to stealing. Robbing, thieving, burglarizing, embezzling, defrauding, except. So wait a minute. Some things interesting about this commandment though. Okay, so I'm talking about stealing, and there's different ways that you can steal, whether it be embezzling or any of those things. It's still stealing or defrauding your brother. But you know what? There's something interesting about this commandment though, isn't there? Did you notice something about it? This establishes private ownership is ordained by God, and He sanctifies it. There is no private ownership if you can't steal. So I'll just point that out, another rabbit. The first few commandments are in relationship with God, and from 4 on our relationship between ourselves, and the breaking of this next commandment may have caused more pain and suffering than any of the others. So all the ones we've talked about, murder, adultery, and all these things, you know what? The next commandment, though, it's probably caused more pain. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. It doesn't say thou shalt not lie. That's not what it said. What does it say? Includes passing on a story about someone without checking it out. Hearing hearsay evidence. Gossip. The hideous thing about gossip is that there's no court appeal. There is no rebuttal. You don't get to defend yourself. You don't even know it's been said. Someone lied about may never know, yet his reputation is marred. Maybe the most hideous of all the sins. This isn't dealing with lying. There is something more insidious here, the concept of false witnessing. If someone is unjustly talked about and you keep silent, are you being a true witness or a false witness? All right, let's go on. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, or his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that's thy neighbor's. Fascinating law. No other statutory system in the law deals with intent. There is no way to enforce this commandment. Can I know what's in your heart? Can I read? You may see a manifestation of my coveting, but that's different. This is strictly in the heart. Luke 12:25. Summary, why do we keep the law? It isn't for our salvation. We express our love by our obedience. The law is an expression of his love to us. And Christ's delight was in keeping the law. God has a double claim on us. He's our creator and our redeemer. And the law is for the redeemed. Even angels are subject to the laws. And the Ten Commandments were never repealed. They were written in stone. They were given to us because we need them. The law of God, the law of Christ, we're under law. And to fulfill, we are all spiritually bankrupt. In bankruptcy law, the debts cannot be canceled. All right, so you're claiming bankruptcy, but they cannot be canceled until the one that owes the debt admits that he's unable to pay, has acknowledged by the debtor. Wait a minute. In bankruptcy law, the debts cannot be canceled until the inability to pay has been acknowledged by the debtor. If I'm in bankruptcy, I have to admit to the court, I can't repay. And it's not until that point are you accepted into bankruptcy court. That's our laws in our land. How does that apply to us spiritually? The remedy is Jesus Christ and his shed blood. He is taking care of the law for us. I offer the invitation then. If you want to think about your status, have you been following the law? Do you see things that you violated? Or are there things that you've done in your life? Have you not obeyed the gospel? Well, the purpose of this lesson is to familiarize us with what God's will is for us. What does he desire of us? After all, if our desire is to go to heaven, don't we want to be what's pleasing to him, what he wants us to be? So that's the intent of the lesson. So it's encouraging you to do what's right in his sight. And the first thing is to obey the gospel. We talked about that this past quarter, about obeying the gospel. Obey the gospel means to obey the good news. But what's the good news? The good news is Jesus died for us. He suffered incredibly, yet he died for us. What love. Now, to show your love in obedience, you obey the gospel. But how do you obey an event? That was 2,000 years ago. You obey it by making the most important event in your life. And so we offer that opportunity to do so today. Or if you've sinned and fall short, you know what? Make it right. So we offer the invitation, and if you will, let's stand and we'll sing the invitation song.